Welcome, everyone. This is Rachel Lang, the Outreach Director for NCGR, and I am very honored and privileged to be here with John Marchesella, who needs no introduction because you have done so much for the astrology community, and we all just love you. So, so welcome, John.
Great, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So, John, you are going to be one of the speakers at our upcoming symposium in November, and it's on the topic of Saturn versus Uranus. And when we started talking about this as a committee, as a board overall, but also as a committee, everyone said we can't have a Saturn symposium without talking about John. So whether you like it or not, you've sort of established yourself as the authority on all things Saturn. So I thought we could have a conversation today and talk about how you approach Saturn, both in the natal chart, but also in transits, and maybe also just a little bit about the talk that you're going to give.
Sure.
So I wanted to just start with asking, how do you describe and define Saturn?
Oh, where do I begin? Saturn is the god that helps us manifest our potential. And in helping us do that, he also lets us know what our potential is not. So when we talk about Saturn being a downer, oh, I didn't get the job that I wanted. That's actually Saturn saying, because the job was not your potential. You got this other job because that job is your potential. And afterwards, the ego always likes to take credit for that. So afterwards, the ego winds up saying, it's a good thing that I didn't get that job that I was going for because that company went out of business. I'd be stuck now. Thank goodness I made this other choice and took this job instead. That's the ego speaking when it realizes that what I got helped me fulfill my potential. But if I didn't get what I wanted, in the moment, I don't realize that it's not my potential.
Yeah.
And in this way, I think this is one of the reasons why Saturn is called the Lord of the Threshold, because I think that I'll call them the inner planets, Sun through Jupiter. I think that's kind of what we've got to work with to make something of ourselves, to manifest, to materialize. And the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, I think that's about consciousness. And Saturn sits between the two, caring that we do make the most of our resources and what we have that we're given, that we have to work with. But Saturn also cares about consciousness and the awareness of what we're given and what we're manifesting. And I think that's why he sits between the two. Sometimes the way that I say it is, the outer planets don't care about your 401k money. They don't care if you buy a house and get to live in it for the rest of your life. They don't care about your happiness and love. They care about the evolution of consciousness, often at the expense of all of those things. But the inner planets, that's what you've got to make something with for your 401k, for buying a house, for having a relationship. And Saturn makes sure that you do that, make something of it, but also to be aware of what you're making and maybe why you're making it. Saturn helps us understand what our motivations are. And in that way, Saturn is very much the conscience. He keeps us on track with why we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And do you think that during those Saturn transits, especially the hard Saturn transits, that we're pulled between the two impulses of our personal desires and what we're trying to create and the larger consciousness or the larger societal effects, family obligations, those sort of more collective ideas? Do you think those Saturn transits highlight that tension?
I think it depends. I think it depends on the nature of the transit, or I should say the nature of the aspect. I think just in talking about transiting aspects, when we have a transit, whether it's Saturn or anything else, although Saturn is always so easy to talk about in predictive astrology because Saturn is so predictable.
Right, the god of the Lord of Time.
Right. One of the reasons why I rely on him so much, especially in my predictive work, is because he's predictable. You never know what Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are going to bring.
Right.
Again, because they don't care about the material world. They're going to bring consciousness in some way. That I can predict, but clients don't care about that. They want to know about what job am I going to get? When am I going to meet somebody?
Right.
So the nature of a conjunction is always the end of something and the beginning of something, the end of an era, the beginning of an era for what that planet represents. And if it's Saturn going over it, then he's just making it very obvious to us. The square, both squares, I think, the closing square and the opening square, that's more of the challenge between the old and the new. Transiting squares are more about, I want everything to change. I just want it to stay the same.
Right.
And we've got to go through that push and pull between the two sides of ourselves. The oppositions, I think, are about seeing what we have made, seeing what was created, seeing the result of our actions, and then having to choose, do I continue to go down this road, or is it time to change? The opposition is more about making a decision, a choice.
Mm-hmm. As someone who is approaching my Saturn opposition right now, I can resonate with everything that you're talking about. And I was on your website and noticed that your business itself is approaching it started in 1976, that your astrology practice is going through its Saturn
Yes.
opposition.
Yes. Yes.
So how do you differentiate, like, whether it's a personal transit, or like, are you noticing any Saturn themes in your business right now?
Yes. Let me say this first, though. 1976, when I started working in astrology, was also a Saturn-Uranus square.
Right. Oh, yes. I'm very aware of that.
Uranus was in Scorpio, of course.
Right.
And now, 45 years later, of course, they have gone to the opposite side of things, but they're still in square once again.
Right.
So not only am I getting themes of Saturn in my work and about my work, but I'm getting the Saturn-Uranus tie, that tension. And back then, it was, can I really make a living at astrology? Shouldn't I get a real job? But the Uranus was telling me, no, just stick with this. Be true to yourself. Just follow the beat of a different drummer. And Saturn was saying, well, I guess I'm going to have to work pretty hard to make this happen. And that's how they came together. And at this point in my work, I just think that it's feeling, what I've been noticing is that I'm just feeling much more comfortable in my work. I would hope so after 45 years. But I'm just feeling more comfortable with it. And I just find that it's a lot easier. And of course, that just means getting older also. When you've seen all of the hard transits already.
I think the way that you described just the tension that you felt when you were first starting your practice, I think, going through this Saturn-Uranus square right now, some of those same ideas and that same tension is up for everyone. So can you speak a little bit about how, just some reflections that you have on this year, 2021's Saturn-Uranus square?
Well, I certainly, well, I'll say this, this is not news to anyone, especially this far into the year and this far into the square, but it just seems to be so much the conflict between, I'll call it for lack of a better expression, between the old and the new, um, starting with the insurrection in the beginning of January. You don't get more Saturn square Uranus than that.
Mm-hmm.
And then 2 weeks after that, what happened on the stock market with Robinhood
Mm-hmm.
breaking the rules on how to invest. And the old hedge fund guys would say, no, 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 you can't break the rules. And
Right,
Robinhood
right.
said, yes, we can. And they did. And it worked.
Yes.
And a month after that, then you had Prince Harry and Meghan coming out speaking against the institution, Saturn Uranus. And then by the time that we got to April, then the whole division, at least in our country, between the vaxxers and the anti-vaxxers, and that being a big divide, very much of a Saturn, follow the rules, and Uranus, no. And now, of course, it's Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think also like to us talking about infrastructure and the infrastructure bill that has just been passed, I kind of look at that as a metaphor for what's happening in our personal lives too.
Sure. Sure.
Just that we're taking those old structures and the things that are showing their cracks with age and bringing them, modernizing them, bringing new systems, bringing us into new systems.
Absolutely. Especially with Saturn in Aquarius and Uranus being so much about restructuring, reorganizing, recreating, rebuilding. You know, Aquarius is really taking anything that Capricorn is and just redoing it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Now, when you throw in a little bit of Pluto moving through Capricorn, saying your buildings are coming down, your bridges are coming down, your foundations are coming down in more ways than one.
And your statues too. Your relics of the past are coming down.
Right. So with Saturn in Aquarius ruling Pluto in Capricorn, then we have this whole infrastructure idea going as well.
Mm-hmm. So that brings up the subject of Saturn through the signs, which relates to your topic for the symposium. So first of all, could you explain a little bit about what you're going to be speaking about at the symposium, and maybe give us a little bit of a snapshot of what we can expect to hear from you and learn from you?
I'll be speaking about Saturn in its dignities and debilities and why they are that way, most especially Saturn in Libra, which seems to be such an odd coupling for an exaltation. I wrote in the blurb there, you know, Saturn is an ugly old man and Libra is beauty. Mm-hmm. Saturn is lead and Libra is the balanced scales. So how did that happen, that Saturn is exalted in Libra? So we'll be talking a little bit about that. And as soon as you start talking about that, then it just begs the question of Saturn in Aries and Saturn in Cancer and so forth. So we'll be talking some about that. We'll be talking about the Saturn-Uranus square a little bit more. Going on this year, and perhaps how it fits into a larger cycle of time and how it might fit into your personal horoscope through your houses. And if we have time, then we'll talk about Saturn moving through the houses and how it manifests each house in order as it runs through the 12 houses and then repeats again.
Saturn. I have this complete love-hate relationship with Saturn, and so I'm really so I think that this topic is so interesting because I think for so many of us dealing with our Saturn limitations, our Saturn, all of the things, the markers of time, and feeling the limitations of time. I think it's so interesting how that plays out as Saturn is moving through each house. And is there one house in particular where you feel that Saturn makes itself the most known when it's either transiting or natally?
That's a tough call. In the transit, I would say it may, and of course this is just my own experience, and my experience with clients. Saturn moving through the first, although really any planet moving through the first is such an announcement of itself. You can't miss it.
Mm-hmm.
But also in speaking about Saturn through the eighth house, I think is so eighth house.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So black or white, do or die, all or nothing, the end of an era, the beginning of a new era, poopy get off the pot. So I think those two houses, I certainly see in my practice for decades, I've seen that Saturn transiting the first house and Saturn transiting the eighth house are the most common times for people to come for readings, especially their first reading.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the Saturn return, the first Saturn return, that by now I call that reading for those clients the Saturn return special.
Yeah.
It just brings them in.
Mm-hmm.
And I was also going to say before, and speaking about the manifestation of potential, my teachers used to tell me that when you're older, Saturn gets easier. And I got older and I realized Saturn doesn't get easier. But what does change is that when you're young, you are not as aware of your potential. And therefore the ego, having a lot of energy in youth, is going to go after what it wants, not realizing that it's not my potential. And therefore Saturn is going to be very disappointing, discouraging, very challenging. As you get older, you just figure out what your potential is and what it isn't. And you get more honest with yourself about it. And you get more tired. So you don't have the energy to waste like you did when you were young. And in that way, life gets easier. But it's not really that Saturn got easier. You just find out about your real potential and you're honest with yourself about it.
I think when you say that, I'm reflecting on Saturn being exalted in Libra and the balance of, looking at what's true versus what I want to be true. And so I think that that is what happens during Saturn transits, or anytime you're moving through those really significant Saturn cycles, is that you have to weigh your life. You have to really look at your life in a very Libra way.
Truer words were never spoken before by someone going through Saturn opposite Saturn.
Right. Yes.
That's exactly where you would be in your life right now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Saturn opposite Saturn.
Yeah. And it's so fitting that the midlife crisis transits would all be that, because that's how the brain actually goes through physiological changes during midlife that allow you to move from that what's considered the heroic mind to the realistic, practical mind. And I think Saturn plays a role in that.
Yeah, that 45, give or take a year, is the real peak of the midlife crisis, because it's Saturn opposite Saturn. But it's also the time in your solar arcs that all of your solar arc positions move into a semi-square to their natal positions. So at 45, give or take a year or so, we're actually getting both. And it's interesting that the solar arcs are judged by the sun, the movement of the sun.
Right.
And Saturn is Saturn, which is the opposite of the sun on the natal wheel.
Yes, yeah. I've never put those two together before, but it, I think it's so fitting and why there's such a tension and such a buildup of energy at that time.
And to use your words, the sun is the heroic mind, and Saturn is the practical mind.
Exactly.
One together.
Right. Ah, this is so exciting. Well, John, I could talk to you all day about these things. But before we leave, do you have anything that, in addition to the talk that you're giving for the symposium, which I'm really excited about, that for anyone who doesn't know, the symposium is November 5th through the 7th this year, 2021. Do you have anything else that you want to talk about? Anything else that you're offering? Any classes you're teaching or books that you have coming out?
Oh, I'm always doing something. You can go to my website, astrojohn.com, and you can also go to the New York City chapter of NCGR on their website where my classes are, which is astrologynyc.org.
Great, and we'll put links to both of those underneath this video. So thank you so much for having this conversation and for being a part of the symposium. And I'm really looking forward to hearing your talk.
Great, very good.